What is up, guys? This is Basak, and you are watching En Route, which is our brand new content segment where we marry culture with business. This show, as well as every other show, is sponsored by the good folks over at Roadmap MBA. Big shout out to them. Now, for this week, we have the super talented, multi-talented Tim Garcia here with us today. Tim is a music label boss, a radio presenter, a curator, a student. I mean, the list goes on, man of the people. Hi, Tim. So nice to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I want to start off by first saying that you interviewed me 2 weeks ago on your show for Bellamy, and I was genuinely so struck by the level of care and detail that went into the show and our conversation. I've told you that 1,000 times since, so gonna par it on here. But you really care about the music, you really care about audio, and it kind of shines through and shows, which is why this is why I wanted to bring you over to our side of life for this segment. First of all, how are you feeling about being the one in the hot seat?
It's funny because it never happens. No, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate this because I'm usually doing what you're doing. And I really enjoy that. And that's one of my major passions. So to be on the other side, it's kind of exciting actually. It's nice because number one, you don't have to prep. Uh, which I do love. I love that process, don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's nice. It is nice. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
He says slightly nervously.
No, 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 no,
Love it,
no.
I love it. We're gonna put you through your paces.
Good, good. That's what we need.
I love it. Now, can you talk to us first a little bit about your music tastes and kind of what drew you into the world of radio and audio to begin with, before we get into everything else, just to better place you for those that are watching and listening. So we're dually functioned today, which is wonderful.
It's quite a long trajectory, but I'll try and summarize it quickly. My mum was a soul singer from Spain before she met my dad, and that definitely influenced what we were listening to when I was growing up. But actually, more so than that, my father has very eclectic music taste. I have a lot to credit him for. He Yeah, I grew up listening to everything from like Gil Scott Heron to Goldie. It was very broad, and that really informed my love of music, how I view it today. And so yeah, background wise, I guess the first genre that I really, really, really got into as a teenager, actually was grime and then hip hop as an extension. And then the way that my mind is, I get quite obsessive about trying to figure out where the root of these things come from. And so in doing so with the hip hop, it was tracing, classic thing of tracing the samples. Where does this come from? That obviously leads you to a lot of jazz, funk, soul, this kind of stuff. And that was a logical progression for me. But then at the same time, when I went to uni, I started as a promoter doing raves, putting on raves with some of my friends, and that was mainly electronic music. So there was a lot of different sounds. Yeah. And then I came out of uni and I was like, I need to work in music. I did a history degree. And
I am
I
confused.
was like, what are you going to do? What are you going to become a teacher? Or I don't know. What are you going to do with that? But no, my passion was music, and it has been for a long time. And so yeah, coming out of uni, it was like I just want to work somewhere. So I applied for some internships, and yeah, rest is history, really. That sort of formed my trajectory. I definitely had a direction. I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it, but it was a deep love of discovering and sharing music, which drew me to the radio. So I applied to do an internship at Jazz FM, and they said yes. So I was intern there, unpaid intern for 3 months.
Shout out, I've done that.
Yeah, working a pub job the other 3 days a week. And yeah, and then just really worked my ass off. I enjoyed being in that environment. I had a few people who mentored me and took me under their wing, saw how passionate I was, and that really helped to sort of ignite that fire inside me for radio and for audio, and being around like really positive and like esteemed, like well-seasoned broadcasters. All day, every day. I was just and like listening to music that I was just like, wow, like
Mhm.
this is amazing working with music in this way. So that was the route in summary. So.
I mean, beautiful root. And here's the fruits of the tree, right? Very, very cool. You said something there. You didn't necessarily know where you were gonna go, but you had a sense of a direction, and that direction was so married to the passion of the music. Talk to me a little bit about that. You're obviously now the founder of Musica Macondo, which is your music label, which is amazing. Um, why was cultivating your own space in music back in 2019 when you guys launched it important for you, given the exposure you had to these incredible seasoned broadcasters and people and artists? You could have just been another, consumer of the stuff, or DJ or whatever. What was the ownership piece like, and why was that important for you to get a piece of this pie?
So yeah, good question. The trajectory around I guess the path around the label was it was a little bit longer than that. So I obviously came out of university, and as soon as I came out of university, I was like, there is so much music here that is connected that not many people talk about how it's connected, at least in the mainstream media or around me. I mean, people were having the conversation as DJs, connecting the dots and this, that, and the other, but I couldn't really find a space where people was talking about like the connection between music from Latin America, West Africa, North America, and that sort of triangle of migration across the Atlantic, which informs so much of the music that we listen to today. And yeah, tracing the roots of a lot of that music. And there was a logical route there from hip hop for me and into jazz, and then into Brazilian music, into West African music, and yeah, so all over that journey I was like, I kind of want to highlight this stuff. And
Mm.
so Música Macondo actually started as a blog. It started as a website out of university, and alongside that we got a residency at the Jazz Cafe, and we were putting on artists that we within what I've just described wanted to put on in London. And so we did that for a couple of years sporadically whilst writing about stuff. And I was doing internet radio at the time as well, and mixes and all this kind of stuff. And so it was just like a platform to highlight the music that me and my friend Orlando, who launched it with me, really enjoyed. And
Mm.
then after that, the good people at Jazz FM, I did a demo, and I was mentored by, I got to shout him out, one of my favorite people, a guy called Chris Phillips, who has been in the game for 40 plus years. And he was like, you should do radio. And he helped me do the demo, and they were like, yeah, we'll put you on. And I don't know how this happened, but they let me call the show Musica Macondo,
Wow.
which for Jazz FM on commercial radio is kind of strange,
Epic. Epic, yes.
Well, that's it. It's like it's a foreign sounding name. All the rest of the shows are very sort of straight jazz kind of vibes. And this was very strange, but they let me do it, and I basically did that for 5 years every week, and so that was another part of the whole brand.
Mm.
But my goal was always to start to release music, and I think in building the platform around it and having the radio show and this, that, and the other, it then was like, okay, now you've created this sort of ecosystem around what you do, and people understanding, like, over time of working on it and sharing music and promoting music in the right way, you then start to build these networks and a community around it and stuff like that. So it was always where I wanted to go. It was just a matter of time of sort of building that foundation.
Mm.
And then actually, I didn't know when I was going to do it, but then I heard the strength of Yelfris's music live, and I was like, I need to release that record. That was the first one we did. So yeah.
Wow, beautiful. I really, really enjoyed that. It's so instrumental when you are driven to releasing the music and amplifying the music, and you do it for the love of the music. I sit in front of artists every single week, some more established than others. and they're always looking for these cheat codes for how to kind of get here and how to, you know, be seen and be heard. And it's so beautiful that you actually took your time with it and earned your stripes. And a lot of the journey you mentioned is actually a credibility piece, right? You had to go and be exposed to the genres, be exposed to the people, be exposed to the artists, to then be able to do creation and be able to kind of decide, all right, this is what good sounds like. I actually know what I'm excited by and the kind of musics that we want to amplify and spotlight. But that takes time.
Oh, 100%. I always say, I mean, it's funny because you look around and there's this expectation in society that you come out of a university and you're going to get like an amazing grad job, and you know, that's it, that's life done, right? You go into it and it's like, and so many people don't know what they want to do at that age. I was very fortunate in the way that I was like, okay, music's the path. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but that's what I want to do. And then, you know, as it unfolded, it became clearer and clearer. But I always say to people is like, use your 20s as a decade of experimentation. You should not have to go, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. Like, no, use it to mess around, to fail hundreds of times, you know, to work out
thousands of times. Yeah.
exactly, and to work out what's good for you, to what works, what doesn't work, and soak it up. You know what you're saying earlier about like, oh, that time to, you know, build your credibility or this, that, and the other. It's like, yeah, but like learning, you know, learning from those people that you're like, oh, I want to do that. How am I going to do that? Listening, learning, asking questions, constantly just being a sponge to all this knowledge that you take in, and you go, okay, now I know how to use my own voice, you know, do it my own way, you know. So yeah, definitely. I would always say, like, I know it's not the question you asked, but like that decade, 20s to 30s, just if you're creative for sure, just experiment as much as you can. Like I would say.
Did you ever kind of languish against farther time and go, no, I want to be here quicker? Or were you always very the journey and the pace of the thing?
That is a really good question, and that's probably gonna provoke a slightly deeper answer. Um, but yeah, taking it away from the intricacies of the music game and the music industry, I would say that that's actually quite a prevalent thing within Western philosophy and Western outlook, which is this idea of constantly having to attain the next thing. I think it's grounded in our school system. I think it's grounded from the time that you go into school, and just like, okay, you got your SATs, then what's after your SATs? Like you got your whatever entrance exam, whatever, whichever path you go, then GCSEs, then A levels. There's always something else to be striving for in the future. Then okay, university, maybe not university, but a job, then, you know, up the ladder like that. And it never teaches you to be present with what you're doing. You're always looking ahead. And that to me is like a bit of a travesty, because it means that you have to work it out when you're older, right? So obviously, like going back to that whole decade of experimentation, yeah, of course, there was elements of me that I'm now happy to say that I've shed, but you know, you get impatient because you look around you, you're like, oh, all these people are doing this stuff and it looks amazing, and you know, it's all online, and obviously online people just share the good stuff most of the time, so it gives you a full sense of reality of what's really going on in the background. And so yeah, of course there was a lot of that, like growing into it, and then you realize actually, like, you know, you're doing what you love, and that's all that matters. You know.
Have you landed, do you think?
Have I landed? Good question. I will retort with I think I was always there.
I don't agree with that.
I think I would no, I would say, and the reason I'm going to say that is I think I was always there. What I think is this idea of landing or arriving. I think everyone's actually arrived. It's just about removing the blocks in the road for you to be able to realize that.
You're quoting the podcast, the other one. That's what you're doing.
The one that I sent you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You sent me a very enlightening podcast conversation with
Michael Singer. He is the author of Untethered Soul.
I was
Amazing book.
into it, completely enraptured, and I just heard you reference a facet of his theology. So shout out to him for all of that. But no, I agree. but that accumulation piece matters. And sometimes when you're in the process of acquiring, because there is a necessary acquiring piece needed for anything we do in this life, sometimes you want to jump before you can walk, or at least I.
Oh, like, okay, in that sense, I completely agree. I think you need to acquire the knowledge. You need to have started with a certain mindset and realize that potentially after lots of work that doesn't serve you moving forward. I think a lot of that is about acquisition and learning and being willing to learn, you know. I agree on that level for sure. Yeah,
We're gonna circle back around to this because there's something here, and I think in the process of our conversation we're gonna unlock. And I let me rephrase that. By the time we're done, I'd be curious to see where we land.
Me too. I look forward to it.
Beautiful. So you've released 5 projects so far under your
Mm,
label, with the sixth
hmm.
one en route, forgive the pun. You've worked with Grammy-nominated artists such as Yalvarez Valdez that you mentioned and Amane. Um, for anyone listening in, what do you look for in the artists that you kind of pick? And how important is that resonance piece for you? Because that's a language that I've come across in your work. And I thought that was really intriguing and powerful for the industry that we're in.
Interesting. So thanks for that question. What do I look for? It's actually quite simple. I think my whole thing with putting out music is like I'm not trying to do this whole thing of let's put out a record and hope that it gets millions of streams and we can make a quick buck. That to me is really not important. What is important is, do I think the music is timeless? Do I think that if someone discovered this in 50 years, 100 years, they would potentially be moved by it? That would be one thing. Another would be, you know, the depth of the music. What are they trying to say? What's the conversation they're trying to have? What's the context around it? Um, and yeah, does it hit me? You know, does it speak to my soul? That's another thing, you know. um but we've done over the 5 projects so far very different projects, and they've all been different musically, in terms of how we've put them out, in terms of systems that we've been using and experimenting with. So yeah, it's first and foremost, do I think the music stands the test of time?
Mm,
That would be the first thing. And then, you know, obviously, do I like the person, and do you think we can vibe and work together and build together? That's also important. You know, working with humble people and people who believe in their art is you know,
for sure.
incredibly rewarding, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I would say those are the keys. But I mean, the music has to speak to you, right? Like I'm not interested in genre. I'm not interested in sticking to a niche. I realize it's probably easier, you know. But that doesn't interest me. I don't think it's fun. I get bored of not having the variety of, you know, a different project, a different sound, a different story.
Beautiful. I mean, what is the central goal then? Because if it's not to make money, and that is honorable to say that, it has to be at least to have as many people listen to this really good fucking art as much as possible, right? So there has to be a commercialization, I would counter, in these beautiful philosophies.
Right. So I mean, I just define what I mean when I say I'm not looking to go and, you know, put out the next hit, this, that, and the other, right? Of course, you know, I run a business. We need to make money somehow. At the moment, it's still a young business. It's me working out how best to go about things. But you know, we put out vinyl records. So I started with focusing on that, focusing on the distribution of that, working that out,
Mhm.
seeing how best to streamline that and make money from that. Um, and then from then on, it's like, okay, I look at the digital side, I look at the streaming, how you can create revenue there. And then after that, it's like the next step is probably I'm starting to look at publishing as well, because, things like advertising, TV, sync licensing of films, that sort of thing. There are ways of making all this stuff into a viable business, but what I'm trying to say is I don't necessarily take something on because it's commercially viable. Obviously, I'm trying to find out a way to make money for the artists and for ourselves so that we can continue doing what we're doing.
Beautiful. Thank you. I just had to counter that. Now, this entire world can be so exciting, but it does have a lot of its trials and tribulations. You mentioned some of them. We're always just trying to survive in an industry that isn't always so readily available when it comes to advertising or connections or knowing people. A lot of artists start from scratch with themselves in their room, myself included. So do you have any advice for anyone who wants to build their own collective, who wants to have their own radio show, maybe even their own music label? Does it feel like you've taken the long way home now, or would you have done it this way regardless?
Good question. I'm someone who when I'm passionate about something, I will go and do it. I'm not going to plan meticulously. I will just go and start and learn from my failures. That is how I operate. I'm like, okay, that's what I want to do. Let's do it. And then from each one, you learn and you build and you move forward. In terms of advice for other people, what on the music game or on starting a label?
I would say let's stick with the label theme.
All right. Okay, cool. It's hard work. You have to really want to do it. Like, you have to really believe that what you're putting out is important. Because there's so much work around it. It's not just this idea of, okay, you can obviously put out, there are so many different types of labels. You could put out digital only releases and build it up that way, of course. But when you're putting vinyl out, it's like you might find the music, be blown away by the music. And this is why I go, for me, I have to be blown away by the music because there's such a long road ahead once you've got the music. It's like, okay, right, now we got to mix it, master it, package it, send it to pressing.
Now you gotta make the child.
Promote it. Yeah, it's literally like,
Now you're like,
it's
now
a
we're gonna
long
raise the child, right?
it's a long pregnancy for sure. Until
And
it's
a
out
long
into,
life after that.
that's it. So you really need to be passionate about it. That's the main thing. I wouldn't just go, okay, I'm gonna start a label because that's what people do.
Yeah.
I would really, you really want to share the voices of the people that you're working with, or it might be your own music as well. Do you know what? Like, it might be your own platform to share your own music, and that's also cool. But a passion needs to be the underlying factor because it's a difficult road. It's a very rewarding road. It's and I would say that to any self-starter. It's a very rewarding process if you love doing it and you love the learning from it and stuff, but it is difficult. It takes time, and you have to have a long-term vision as well. It can't be like, oh, I'm gonna do this and then get rich quick in a few years or whatever. It's like, I think you have to have a long-term vision, but then at the same time, you could just put out a label for a few years and go, oh, that's it. That was that project. Move on to the next one. That's also fine, but I would say to get into it, you need to be passionate because there are so many elements that people don't see.
Been beneath the surface, absolutely. And if I can add to that, don't do it if all you're going to do is add more noise into this world, because one kind of pattern and theme that's particularly concerning for me is this oversaturated market that we're in, overconsumption. I even went to see a film today that I mentioned to you offline that's on its 10th series. It should have ended come number 5, let's be real. Like, it's a constant turning of the wheel, and I'm really nervous about the quality of the produce versus the quantity of the produce. Is that something that concerns you at all? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. When you're working in music in the area that we're working in, I think it is all about the quality of what you're putting out, because that's ultimately what you're going to build a reputation of over time.
Mhm.
and what people eventually are going to come back to is the considered approach of putting out a quality product. I don't like viewing music as a product, but we are talking in business terms and label terms. So it's the quality of the product. So it's more of an, I guess, like artisanal approach as opposed to like a production kind of thing, you know. Um yeah, that's what I would say. But that's I mean, people do different things. There are so many different approaches. There are in-betweens as well, you know.
There
So
gonna segue us over to another in-between project you are currently working on that I was so blown away by. It's a community project that you're currently building. Tell me a little bit about the Davorio album, if you could, in terms of what it is, how it came about, and more importantly, how this music project is going to benefit the community in which it serves.
okay, so yeah, thanks for asking about that. We on where are we? 10 days ago now, May 5th, released a project called Davorio, which means ivory in Italian, is by an Italian musician called Samuele Strufaldi, who is from Florence in Italy. And he basically, what I've been really interested in is how can we use the medium of recorded music to actually create tangible change in communities where the music comes from.
Mm,
And being someone who is really I really love music from all over the world, right? But then at the same time there's, and I'm going to go down a tangent here so you kind of understand where the background of this thought process comes from, but it's in part why I'm doing a master's in ethnomusicology, but it's to be reflexive of my lens as someone like myself who grew up in London, who grew up in the West, who has certain privileges that other parts of the world don't have. And my responsibility as a label for elevating unheard voices and how that you can work with people who put out amazing music, but also make their voices audible. And in doing so, rather than using a sort of colonial extractive model, you know, the irony is that capitalism is grounded in colonialism, but um, rather than using that, whereby, you know, you're a label from London and you're going into, let's say, Brazil, and you're licensing the music and then profiting from the music to a Western audience and making way more money, and none of the music goes back into Brazil. That to me is not an ethical way of working.
mm,
And so it's looking at how you can flip that narrative. And so this is the first time we did a Brazilian compilation, the record before this one called Brasil Novo with a friend of mine called DJ Tahira. And we said that if we make money, we will be putting money back into Brazil. So our idea is to we're in conversation with a few samba schools in the northeast of Brazil to send some of the profit back there. So it's more of like a circular model. And it actually contributes to society. Whereas this project is entirely different. This is new territory for me. This is basically an Italian musician who got invited by his friend who's a djembe player. That's a West African drum percussion instrument.
yeah, this is what to ask.
From he's from Ivory Coast, and he basically invited Samuele. They both live in Florence together, and he invited Samuele over to his village, a place called Gozanya, which is in the Guemon region in the western central part of Ivory Coast. And his tribe are called the Gede tribe, and they went over and recorded some music. They basically recorded the story of the village,
Wow.
and Samuele spent some time out there and you know, got to know everyone, and yeah, they created all these amazing field recordings, and then they came back to Florence, and he composed, he's a very talented composer musician, and he composed this album which was sort of like a cross-cultural conversation between Gede music, the Gede of Gozanya, and his musical understanding, which is grounded in jazz, electronica, and also Western classical music as well. So it's this meeting of two different cultures that wouldn't usually meet.
Each other. Sure, sure.
And so in doing so, the whole album tells the story and wisdom of the village in this new musical language, which is a conversation between, Samuele and the villagers of Gozania. And so he came to me with this project. I listened to the music. I was like, this music's incredible. Of course, I want to work on it. And he said, look, I want to put some of the money that we make from this project back into the community that it came from. And I said, well, of course. And we were thinking about it. Initially, we were like, oh, yeah, we can put like 50% of the profit back in, pay ourselves for our time and all that sort of stuff. And the more and more I thought about it and the more reflexive I was just like, do you know what? Like, let's look at having a conversation with Boris and with his people and going like, what are they looking to achieve? What do they want to do? What do they want to add to the community?
They need, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's this, and it's kind of this thing that they use in academia now, especially in development studies and stuff like that, is this idea of participatory methods. So having a conversation with the people you're working with and letting them decide what they want to do rather than just,
Fighting
imposing
for
it.
that, right?
Exactly. And so they came back and were like, well, actually, look, like most of us work on coffee and cacao plantations.
Yeah.
And there's not really that many places. The education is not really good post Civil War. It's improving a lot. But there's not that many places for the kids to learn, to play, to be while everyone's working the land, right? And they also don't earn a lot from their work. So building stuff takes a long time because of that, because of the cost of living and everything. Um, and so they were like, we want to build this library and community space. So we asked them to let us know how much it would cost. Did some did some costings and all that sort of stuff, and worked out that obviously the conversion rate for anything that you make in the West going to Ivory Coast goes a lot further than it does over here. So yeah, we then decided as a collective that everything that we made from this album would go back into the community to build this space for them. And it's a really beautiful model, a circular model where, in making the voices of the villagers of Gozanya heard and audible, they are then able to tell their story and contribute to, further social tangible change that builds, futures within that community. So I think it's the first time we've done it. We've also got a fundraiser alongside it, so it's not just like record sales and stuff that we have a GoFundMe campaign too, which is going to enable us to start constructing while we recoup some of the money from the record sales. But for me, it really is an example of how you can use like good quality recorded music to actually make a tangible difference. And then my intention with that is to use it as a case study to be able to move forward and hopefully, apply for grant funding and so that we can pay ourselves to do this stuff as well in the long run.
Beautiful. I mean, what a worthwhile project, and kudos to you and the team for taking this on, because I know how much work goes into those things. But you're able to give back to these villagers who also culturally are going to be impacted for decades to come, because what you're actually doing is allowing their stories to be told, but also kind of solidified and protected. So those oral traditions that are so important in those parts of the world, especially, are protected forevermore, and they have a really cool CD they can listen to, and then hopefully we can raise awareness to them that side. So cool. I especially wanted to bring this up because Roadmap MBA, who sponsors this series, is so committed to providing education to as many people across the world as possible, particularly those that just don't have access to it. So it's just really interesting and beautiful to be able to see, no matter what your discipline is, right? You can give back, whether it be via an MBA program, an organization, or via the love for the thing and love for the music. So yeah, kudos again, and so excited to see what you guys do with it.
Thank you, Bash. Thanks for the kind words. I appreciate you. And yeah, it's been a long journey. But very rewarding. We are in a good place with the fundraiser. The record's out, the record's selling. Obviously, if you want to support it, you can go to Música Macondo Bandcamp page. It's got all the info on there, including the fundraiser. But yes, it's still a long road ahead because you've got to construct the thing once you've got the money in. And then also work in a way that's you're able to create a plan for the future sustainability of that project. It's not necessarily just about creating a building and just going, okay, there you go. It's like, okay, how can we actually work together to make this work for the long term?
Yeah,
How's it, how are we going to manage this? How are we going to implement all the things that you guys want to implement? So yeah, it's definitely a learning process for me, but one that I am really enjoying.
I love it. I mean, using your music as a driving force for not only enjoyment, but serious social change is everything we are about on this side as well. So if anything we can do to support, we'd love to.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, and thanks for highlighting this. It means a lot to us.
The email's going. Now, you are, of course, also doing a MA, as you mentioned, in ethnomusicology. Do you sleep ever? I mean, there's an app that I can mention
uh, yeah, good question. To be fair, I will say this. I am doing a very part-time MA in ethnomusicology. So I've just finished my second year out of a 3-year part-time course. I think the one thing about education that I will say from my own experience was that when I did my undergrad, I was that year where all of the fees went up if I took a year out, then I'd be paying 9 grand a year.
Oh,
So yeah, so I was like,
you're
well,
old.
yeah, exactly. I'm old.
Because I was
Yes,
right after that. I paid the
yeah.
9 grand. Thank you very much. Shout out.
Yeah, exactly. That Tory Lib Dem coalition that helps everyone. But no, yeah, I was that year. So I came out of school and was like, well, I don't want to be in a crazy amount of debt, so I'm gonna go straight to university. As such, I basically chose what A levels I did well at and did a degree in that. And that I would not recommend that to anyone unless you're super passionate about that stuff. It's like I would just take some time to know yourself. I reckon I think is better for people, honestly, like on reflection, do a couple years of work and then do a degree.
I agree. I really regret not diving into the world of work earlier, but that was because I was privileged enough not to have to do that, and so I didn't, and then had to learn backwards a little bit.
Well, that's it. Like, but I just think, in that time of learning, experimenting, you might know, okay, actually, I do want to do a degree in this. This interests me, rather than feeling like you're forced to just go to university for the sake of getting a degree, right? And I will not change my experience at all. I would not exchange it, or even if I could go back, because number one, that led me to a career in music. That was where I really ignited my passion even further from putting on events and dances and all that sort of stuff. But what I will say is, in taking time out of education and then, you know, really, really being passionate about wanting to go back into something, it's like now it's like I look forward to going into uni every time. It's like I'm learning. It's wonderful. It's an amazing space to be when you're really passionate about what you're learning about. And having, taken 8, 9 years, no, 7 or 8 years before going back to education.
Yeah.
Um,
And living life, right? There's something
yeah,
like
yeah,
life is such a
absolutely.
teacher, and especially with what we do, there is no manual, which is why I so wanted to create the series because it's impossible. It's damn near impossible. I mean, it's not impossible because here we are, but it is impossible to grasp at these very larger than life people with these larger than life concepts and inklings that you don't have the necessary tools to lean on just yet. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you like. You don't know if you could trust what you like. And that intuition piece and that instinct piece that we spoke about previously, that comes with time earned. Time earned to build the cred, time earned to ask the questions, but time. And so it's exciting for me that you're excited that you get to go to university and love life. And I know
Yeah.
that was the fate of all of us. I mean, yeah, I did love my degree, but
Good, good. And that's wonderful. Yeah, I do now, you know. It took me a while to get there, but I do now. And also the other thing is like you're saying, like when do you sleep and stuff? I think it's when you love what you do, you make time for the stuff.
mm,
You make time. It takes a lot of experimenting to know how to balance all these
yeah.
plates, to spin all these plates, right? Sometimes it can get very overwhelming. You know, I have been through multiple crashes of
Yeah.
overwhelm, you know, where you like, this is too much. I'm doing way too many things. I'm taking on way too many things. But in doing those things, it's kind of like having a slight mental breakdown, and then
At all times.
yeah, well, but then you get to that point where you kind of like, I'm doing too much, and it's going back to this idea of, you know, constantly aspiring for the next thing, right?
Mm,
I was only able to come to a place now whereby I feel pretty present in what I do from having those experiences, you
mm,
know, from really breaking down and going, okay, only way is up now, and I'm not going to make that mistake again, you know. But I had to do that several times because
mm.
I am that way inclined. I like lots of projects. I know you are like that too. So
Big
it
against the yeah.
it's one of those things, right? It takes doing the work to understand that about yourself, because you're not going to know that from school. You're not necessarily going to know that from university. You're not really going to necessarily know that from, you know, the earlier parts of your 20s either. So yeah, it takes just doing it to understand yourself in that way.
And if I can add to that, it's seeing yourself do it
Mm,
successfully
mm.
or not, but mostly successfully, to kind of be like, okay, cool. You know, if you start out, for example, to give you guys a more tangible example than these concepts, if you start out in student radio, and that's really overwhelming, and then you go from community, and that's really overwhelming, and then you go from community to national. Like there are some linear processes going on in this world, and if you see yourself do it enough times, you know you'll be okay.
Well, that's it, man. Like I look back at my first shows on Jazz FM, and I'm like, this is wild. Uh yeah, I sound terrible. Like I always like the music's on point, but
Good. Yeah, yeah. He's
but like
wonderful. I'm so talented.
but the links, like God, like I look back, I was like, oh my God, I sound nervous, I'm croaky, but it's just doing it and doing it and doing it and soaking up the, you know, soaking up the information and learning from it, learning, like getting to know your own voice.
Mm,
Um is the important thing throughout that process, and just being open to everything, really, honestly. Like the other thing I would say is this idea of, it's not even idea, this is what I'd recommend to everyone who's on that sort of similar path or journey. Always take a little bit of time to practice gratitude for how far you've come,
mm.
you know. To go to look back over your shoulder and go, oh my God, 5 years ago I would not have expected that I was here.
Do you mind if we do it right now?
If you want.
We'll do it together. I'll do one, you do one. I think it's enough.
Mm,
We got to practice what we preach.
you first then.
I'm grateful that I'm in a space now in my life that I get to have the luxury of choice. The projects that I choose to delve into. That was not always the case. Again, speaking about getting the experience. And I'm grateful that all of my projects, this one included, this is my baby, sing the same tune because I operate with the same value system. And I'm grateful that I've listened to myself enough times to trust in that value system and that person and in that intuition, so that everything, actually all the component parts make sense, and all your component parts to me make sense, because I think you're pretty much the same way. You can't steal my answer, by the way.
I'm not going to steal your answer, but I am going to comment on it, which is listening to your intuition as a guiding force is so important
Mm,
throughout the creative journey, because it's not a conventional career path.
no.
It's not like, okay, I get into this and then I, you know, work my way up and this, that, and the other, right? It's not that. It's you deciding which way to go constantly. So having the clarity to be able to listen to that inner voice, and sometimes it is difficult, obviously. And oftentimes you will make mistakes, and then you'll know, okay, next time I need to listen to actually what's going on underneath. Is so important. It's so important. So yeah, I completely agree on that one. In terms of what I'm grateful for, I'm just so grateful to be able to earn a living from sharing music. Whether that is playing records to people in nightclubs, putting on events, sharing music on the like through the record label on the radio, just working with great people who inspire me. And even just that, I find it wild that festivals book me and pay me money to play records to people. That to me is wild.
Should we talk about a particular festival that just
Oh
booked
man, yeah. Oh, if
we
you
talk about
want, like I'm still buzzing off that. Like it's pretty mad.
it begins with G.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. Yeah, this first, well, I always said to myself when I was like when I wanted to be a DJ, and that was quite early on. I didn't actually start till a lot later, but I was like, if I ever perform, whether that is as a musician or a DJ in my teens, I was like, I want to play Glastonbury Festival.
Woo!
Like that's the biggest festival in the world.
Can we
That's like,
let that sit for a minute? He said Glastonbury.
yeah. And so I was like, that's always been a pipe dream. It's not something I've thought about constantly, but it's always been it's always been somewhere.
Standard.
Yeah. And I always said to myself, I'm not gonna go and sorry, the sun is coming in. So I'm not gonna go and pay for my ticket. I wanna get booked to do it. And so this year, out of nowhere, was the first year that one of the guys, Lawrence, shout out to Lawrence from Shangri-La, hit me up for to play. So I am playing this year, and that to me is wild. Like
There is a
the
heavenly light dosing over you as you say this. Can I just say?
divine intervention.
You are always meant to play Glastonbury.
Yeah, so I mean, just grateful for that, to be able to uh, earn a living from playing records is a wild thought, and it's possible, like it takes work, but it's really possible. And it's a beautiful thing, sharing music and um engaging in that community, which is so rich and soulful. That's what I'm grateful for. Yeah, I love that process.
Tim Garcia, are you still en route or have you arrived?
Okay, we're coming back to it. I would say I've arrived in myself for sure. That has been more of a recent process. And not even in like a arrogant way or anything like that. It's just a self-assured understanding of who I am and where I want to go. But then also an understanding of not necessarily being attached, sorry, to the outcome, which I think is something important that I've learned along the way. Because you might arrive at that place, and then again we go back to that conditioning of what's the next thing, right? When reality, this is going to sound cheesy, is going to sound corny or whatever, but I do believe in it, is it's about the process, not the outcome. It's about the journey, not the destination. It's that old adage, right? It's like, are you enjoying what you do now? Do you like really, really love it? That's all that matters, because the only moment that matters is the present moment.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to connect with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Nothing more to say after that. Mic drop of a sentence. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Bash, and En Route and everyone. So thanks. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.